Hello there. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Russ and me for this special celebratory session, if you will, on how UX and data science achieve trustworthy AI. I am going to make a little space in the beginning just to introduce Russ and myself to you. But we're really excited and passionate about this partnership where we are bringing together the best of what UX does with the best of what data scientists do. And we think it's a really powerful combination of skills. So we're going to just have a free-flowing conversation with some prompts to really dig into what that relationship looks like, why it's an important one, and I think we'll have a lively conversation. You are welcome at any time to put comments or questions or examples in the comments. We will see those and we will get to them in the course of our conversation, but feel free to add those at any time. Well, with that, I am going to turn it over to my friend Russ Clay. Russ, would you give the audience an introduction as to who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your company?
Yeah, absolutely. I am so excited to be talking to you today. The more we've talked about planning this, I feel like the more excitement I've had, because I keep thinking of things like, I can't wait till we get to talk about this. I can't wait till we get to talk about this with other people. So it's going to be great. Thank you. So yeah, my name is Russ Clay. I am a data scientist in the company that I started and work for is CommonWealth Data Solutions. So based here in Charlottesville, Virginia. I am, my background is kind of all over the place. So I am a psychologist by training, an academic psychologist. Was doing that work. I ran my research lab, studying stereotyping and prejudice and just kind of the way people shape their beliefs. I was doing that work up until about 2016 and teaching a lot of undergraduate statistics at the time as well. And then pivoted into data science from there. I spent 7 years at the University of Virginia Health System building predictive models for the hospital, early warning systems to detect patient deterioration, and using a lot of health system data for that. And then about 2 years ago, I went off on my own and started a data science consultancy. And I've been working with businesses in a lot of different areas since that time. Nonprofits, health tech companies, academic publishing companies, you name it. We're all over the place, and we're just kind of, I feel like we're in this environment where AI and data science and the technology that surrounds those things is changing so rapidly that it's been a fun ride of just keeping up with that and trying to help people get good value out of these tools that are emerging.
Yeah, huge paradigm shift we're going through here. So no, thanks for that awesome introduction. I will follow along, and it's no mystery to me why we get along and have so much in common. Your social psychology background paired with data, there's a lot of parallels to the kind of work I do, which is in more of what you might call the UX space, but I'll say a few words about that later. But yeah, so where I'm coming from is Saddle Stitch Consulting. That is a firm that I set up a few months ago. So I'm relatively new. I mean, I've had the company for a while, but leaning into it full time is a newer endeavor. But I have a long history in doing research, 20 plus years doing market research, competitive intelligence, user research, product research. Prior to coming to Saddle Stitch, I have been with digital agencies working for Fortune 500 companies and others who are looking to bring to market new digital solutions. So I have had the privilege of working in these very innovative, creative spaces where we are trying to find product market fit. We are talking to our users and trying to discover sort of these hidden needs. We use data, we collect data, we analyze it, and we also, have a keen interest in serving people and doing well by them. So that's been a kind of a guiding light as I have branched on my own. But it's as I have been in consulting, and when AI came on the scene in these digital agencies, I was privileged to be able to sit with the data scientists and AI engineers as we were developing generative AI proofs of concept. So I had a front row seat to how important it is for UX and for data science to collaborate. So that's what we are going to dig into.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, Russ. Well, let's go. Let's do it. Let's start off with our first kind of provocative question, which is, kind of why the heck are we here? Why do we care about UX and data science? We've said it's a really important and essential partnership, but what makes it that way?
Well, so as we've talked, I think generative AI, really changed the game in terms of how we need to build technologies and incorporate both user experience and data science insight into that process. I think, at least my experience has been historically, these two teams have they know about each other, they talk when they're supposed to, but they often work in silos because there wasn't perceived to be a whole lot of overlap. For me, and I think like the more we've talked about kind of how our work informs how we inform each other in the work that we do, I'm recognizing how essential this partnership is, because now we are not building systems where we take the data and we create a dashboard or something that is going to produce one kind of static and deterministic output. And once we understand what we're producing and put guardrails around that, we can kind of shape that from the user's perspective to a particular the vision that we have, and then just kind of let it run and be confident that it's not going to change. Like we don't live in that world anymore when we're talking about generative AI. We have data sets that we're going to use to try to answer questions. And those data sets are probably good for some questions. They're probably okay for some questions, and they're probably really misleading for others. And once we start adding tools to that environment where we're not really constraining as much what the data is doing, what we're producing with that data, but we're really kind of trying to be flexible and open-ended with it and allow users to have a lot of input and into the process of creating insight with that data, and we're not really telling them what they can and can't do to a large extent, then we really need to understand what could be produced, where could this go wrong, what experiences could this lead to that we didn't necessarily intend and potentially don't want. I think it's really important at the same time when we're creating these tools for the UX team to then understand, well, what is possible with the data set that we have. We might have a vision in terms of what we want our customers or our clients to experience. Is that vision going to be realized, or are we going to potentially open up a whole world of insights and opportunities and experiences that we hadn't set out to create initially, and that we can't really put back in the bottle once it's there? Would you agree with that from the work you've done, the perspective that you take?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would add a couple other nuances as to why I personally started to really feel the importance of this connection. It's much for the same reasons that you say, but one of the ways it manifested for me was thinking about bias in particular. Like we think about that in user research all the time, how to ask unbiased questions, how to do proper sampling. So it was always something that was on my mind. But then when ChatGPT came out, and it was really easy to see ways in which data that wasn't mindfully curated, collected, and used could very quickly and at a pretty unprecedented scale do harms for folks. And so I think that impetus to really understand the relationship between data and what you say, like what are the possibilities as to what we can solve. And hey, maybe we need to get more different, better data too. I mean, that's a lever that we can pull, but it's something that I don't know that had been on the forefront of my mind in the same way. So that definitely really rings true for me as well.
as you were saying that, one other thing that has really come to mind recently also has to do with the pace of change of AI tools.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
you mean the slow, leisurely pace, Russ? Is that what you're saying?
Meandering walk that we've been taking, right? But yeah, so it is almost like when we are designing the user experience, we're designing it based on what we know AI can do today, but we don't implement systems for a month or 2 months or whatever the pace of change is right now, right? So I think more than ever, we kind of also have to think about like what could change, like in our wildest dreams, what could change over the next year to 18 months or whatever kind of we want the minimum lifespan of this system that we're creating to be before we have to get in and really think about it again. And do we have to design for those possibilities as well, or at least ensure that we have a heads up to when the system can maybe start doing things that we hadn't even thought about if
Yeah.
we do when we started, right? I mean, in that, or at least designing it so that it won't take on new responsibilities until we intentionally allow that to happen.
I think that's a good note about agency, that we can, I mean, there is unpredictability, but there's also guardrails and design like constraints we can put around it until that level of risk gets to a place where we feel comfortable. And a lot of that is talking to users. So, and because it's not just about what we perceive the risk to be, but the people who are experiencing it, what they perceive as well. So we have a comment from Kian. Welcome. He just notes that that risk makes a lot of sense. LLMs allow you to operate at a higher level than the raw data, but that connection to the raw data was acting as a qualitative guardrail to ensure your analysis are aligned with reality. And I love that comment, because one of the things in my consultancy, I think the first thing, the primary thing I do is like ground our work in my problem ground truth. Really bringing that to bear and continuing to use that in the work that we do. So, that one struck a chord. Russ, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah. So I was reading the next comment that came up as well. But yeah, I just really like the voice that gives to I think what we were talking about is that, yeah, we were tethered in a lot of ways for a long time to the raw data and the really deterministic methods that we use to take that raw data to transform it into insights. And that was a key skill that I mean, that was one of the skills that I prided myself on being able to add, right? The value that I really wanted to bring to the table when I was going to work with a client or with my employer, right? To say, okay, I can make this data make sense in a very particular way that's going to solve a particular problem that you have. But we're moving very quickly to a state where we want a data set that we can just ask to solve whatever problem we have to think up on that day. And, I think we have to really bear in mind that all data sets are not completely comprehensive. They don't measure and record everything that we could potentially want to know. But our tools, we're designing tools to give us a very confident output in a lot of ways from the questions we ask it, the prompts that we give it. Right. And so we don't want to put ourselves in a situation where we're misled to believe that we have greater insight than we do because we have added this flexibility to the way that we can interact with this data set. It's more important, I think, to understand what the limits and what our confidence in different answers or different responses should be, right?
Absolutely. I'm going to pick on one note that you made and transition to our next prompt. We have many. We're only on the first one. We just have so much to say, which I knew would happen. But the next prompt is where specifically does UX and data science intersect in the life cycle? You were already talking about a few places where this comes into play. You and I have talked a lot about problem definition specifically. And let me give real briefly some background onto this diagram. I had used this in some other contexts and was doing a little YouTube video on the problem definition phase. And I started getting into the data pieces. I'm like, oh man, this is like really dry for me to go through it. I'm not a data scientist. I mean, I I get the gist, but I'm so glad that you joined in to talk, and we had a really good conversation, very enlightening about this very life cycle, and in some cases where it falls apart. So I don't know where to start here other than to say there's lots of steps in creating a generative AI enabled system, lots of opportunities for conversation. But what would you observe as sort of the maybe most critical points to be in sync? And maybe we'll take it from there.
Yeah, so I think for me, the first time I looked at this life cycle, what jumped out is, so I would kind of start at 12 o'clock on the clock dial here with problem definition. I think for me, that's usually where we start thinking about system design. But I would probably not make that an iterative part of the process, right? I think that, and even more so in a generative AI enabled system, is something I think we need to get right up front and really be confident about before we move on to the next step. We really need to understand the problem we're solving, that we want to solve, define it well, define our users, define the value that we think we can get by solving this problem. So we really understand our purpose, right? That's all about our purpose for the system. And then the next step, understanding what data do we have or do we need to try and build a system that's going to help us solve this problem, and get that data in place. And kind of after that point, maybe the data preparation or the development step, that's maybe where I would start the cyclical iteration. And I think that can be really valuable there, because you're going to get feedback from your system. You're going to want to update things. You're going to recognize that maybe you can broaden the application of the system or tighten it or point it in a different direction. You're not going to want to have a static system at that point. But I do think that if you get stuck trying to redefine the problem at every iteration, you can really spin your wheels a lot and not make a whole lot of progress in the generating value part, because you're really still trying to understand what problem you're trying to solve in the first place. And I don't think that's where you want to be.
Yeah.
So for me, that's where I would like to get through probably those first 2.5 to 3 boxes before really starting to iterate.
Yeah, and what's interesting about those boxes is that, and you tell me your thoughts on this, but it tends to be the places that people don't naturally want to spend their time, because maybe it doesn't feel as quote unquote productive, when in fact so much learning is happening in those stages that saves heaps of expense and time from focusing on the wrong thing, or going back and retraining if you're fine-tuning your own models and so forth. And you can tell me that's pretty intensive work. It's not flipping switches. So there's a lot of iteration, and sometimes those cycles can have unpredictable lengths. So the better defined the problem, the better that what the data set can and can't facilitate to solve that problem. It seems to me a much better efficiency downstream, despite some of the unpredictability within that.
I would agree. I would layer on with that though. One thing AI might do is, if we've got a really solid problem definition, if we're really confident about the data that we've built and the scope of questions that data is applicable to, AI might really accelerate the other parts of that process, right? I would say this is probably in the last 6 months more than anything. Building a predictive model, doing the statistical work, as kind of nerdy as that is, that is kind of my favorite part of what I do. I love getting in there and playing with those models. However, I have found that requires the least amount of my time now.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, and I was such a skeptic for a long time, and I still am not ready to turn that process over to a generative AI system and just have it do it for me. And I don't think it's there. I wouldn't have it do it for anyone. But I can be so much more of an orchestrator now in that process, and creating the pipeline and building the model, and just kind of asking for certain things that I know I want to do with it, and I want it built in a certain way, and I want to investigate certain features and things like that. I don't have to have hands on keyboard to do that as much, and that really creates a lot of efficiency in that part of the process. So um, I do think if we spend more time up front in that problem definition and data preparation phase, we can actually gain a lot of efficiency at that back end. And you tell me, like, I would put this back to the user experience perspective. If we've got good logging and tracking of the way customers are interacting with the system, and we understand and we can get good feedback, does that also help you gain efficiency in your side of the work and understanding, like, how can we continually revise this and make it a better experience and make it a more human-centered system that is going to deliver and maximize that value we're getting? Would that also be true?
Oh, I think it certainly can be true. I don't know that it always is true. Because I think, again, I'm going to have everything go back to problem definition if I had my way about it. But one of the things you're doing in that phase, and you and I have talked about how valuable it is to assert or have a hypothesis around what is the optimal or desired output. If we solve this problem properly, what should we expect to see? And I think that can help us make sense of metrics and collect the right ones. Because I also think, and we're going to talk about this in our next prompt, like, what is data? I mean, it is opinionated in a sense. We want to collect the things that are meaningful based on the context and this problem space. But it's easy to get maybe carried away with data for data's sake. It is a lot of noise, maybe less signal. So I think there's some intention in this cycle from problem definition all the way over to monitoring and improvement that UX can have a strong role in, because we can help clarify desirable outputs, how we'll know if things are going astray, and we can put in those like guardrails and those anticipatory sort of warning systems as well. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's talk about data then. I didn't even mention what UX is off the top of this. I'm going to assume people are following along with that, but we should at least talk about data. What is data, Russ?
Data. I feel like, doesn't everybody just know this at this point? This is like the world we live in. No, like I said, I spent a number of years as a researcher, and data was so central to everything I did, because it is your measurement of the real world. It is representing whatever it is that you want to generate knowledge about, or gain insights about, or track, or we want this. We want to get insight. We're building tools to gain insight, to help us do our work better, to help us generate more value. How are we going to know when that happens? How are we going to know how to do that? I mean, data is what we are using as the backbone, kind of ground truth that is going to help get us there. But it is, by definition, incomplete and imperfect view of the world that we are trying to interact with, right? Data depends so much on measurement, on how we define the products that become part of that data set, and that shapes and structures what it represents and what we can understand about that. Like, it's this kind of historical record of the world that we want to use to generate maybe some predictions, or maybe some forecasts, or maybe just new knowledge. But it's only going to be, it can only be as good as that record that we're using to generate the insights from, right? And so this is why really good data tends to be really expensive. It tends to take a long time to curate. And it's really valuable once we have it. We don't want to give it up. The best research in the world that I ever saw really relied on the methods that were used to construct the data set that built it. Like, you might have some really innovative insights and ideas about what you're going to do with that data once you have it, but until you've put that data set together, all the best ideas in the world aren't going to matter a whole lot, because you need that raw information to work with. So for me, that's how I would go out and define data. And I think it's really essential to understand that it is a flawed and incomplete picture of the world. But I think I shared this quote with you the other day. there's kind of this rule in statistics. Every model, all models that you build in statistics are wrong, right? But some of them are valuable. And that all depends on data as well, right? All data is incomplete. All data is biased in some way. But as long as you understand it, some of it can actually be valuable in helping you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Super powerful. Hard to do anything without it. But I love the way that you kind of gave us the real scoop on what data is, its limitations, but also, I like to think of it. This is what makes data more approachable for me as a user researcher, is oftentimes data can be an artifact of the human experience. We do things on our phone that generates data. Like we're always clicking or interacting and often generating lots of data in our day-to-day activities. So one of the things that's been empowering to think about for me, engaging with data scientists, which can be honestly intimidating, Russ. You all, you've got your massive, spreadsheets and models and scripts.
Introduce you to some more of our crew. I don't know how intimidated you are.
But I was like, oh, what kind of, questions can I ask where I know it's not really dumb, but a good question is what does this data represent? Where did it come from? I even think about survey data because that's the world I'm in often. That includes often lots of Likert scales. So people are rating, oh, how much do you agree or disagree on a scale of 1 to 5? Well, if you get too precious about the math in that, you start to lose the fact that it's just the difference between a 4 and a 5 isn't this real thing in the world. It is an abstraction of a guess. So, that informs how you interact and rely on that data and how you use it. So
I am smiling because if you knew how much time I have spent historically, dithering over the importance of whether we should have a 5-point or a 7-point Likert scale.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
What does that actually mean? And do we reverse code? I'm not going to get on that, but yes, that there is a whole world there
whole literature on that.
It matters about how you're measuring things, but at the end of the day, what is it that you're really capturing there? That's what's important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, our next prompt here is kind of a big one, I think, in terms of generative AI. I would say, as I said, this was kind of how I got particularly intrigued by this relationship with data science. But what do we do about biased data? Because you said all data is biased. So what is one to do with that?
Yeah. And I say that all data is biased because all data that you generate comes from a perspective, right? It's got to come from one specific measurement tool in one place, one time. And you can combine data sets and we can add perspectives to it. But I think it is unreasonable to expect that any data set can have come from a universal perspective. What we aim to do, I think, at least from a research perspective, and I would say this applies to any time you want to generate insights out from the data set, is that we're trying to get the most representative set of data for the question that we are trying to answer with it, right? And that's what's important. And there are trade-offs that happen. So if we maximize the representativeness of a data set to answer one question, we are probably making it biased in some other way for some other question that it wasn't intended for, right? And so that's where I think we have to be really careful and intentional in how we cultivate data sets and how we curate them and how we reshape them once we've got one that's the way we want it and we decide we want to use it for something else. I think we have to be really thoughtful about what we failed to measure or failed to record when the data set was initially created, because it was created for one specific purpose, and hopefully it meets the requirements of that purpose well. But how does that lead to shortcomings in other purposes it may serve? And this is where I think the generative AI environment, where we want to use kind of one central data set maybe for a whole bunch of different open-ended kind of questions and prompts and tasks, that's what makes that really tough and risky potentially, because not every question is going to be as well suited for the data set as every other one, right? That data set probably has its sweet spot. And once we get outside of that, we could get really confident answers, but it doesn't mean that they are necessarily as good as the ones that we get when the data is being used used for its intended purpose. So with that being the case, like as a UX, on the UX side of things, like how do you spot that, or how do you kind of call out initially, like what sorts of biases matter for the question that that we want to answer, and how do we have safeguards up for that from the get-go?
Yeah. Well, to reinforce something that you said, not all data is biased, but not all data, or not all bias is harmful, I should say. So, it's an unavoidable fact that data will have sort of an opinion because it was collected for reasons by people for an end, right? But we can ask good questions about, where that came from, why it was collected in the way that it was, the definitions, to find the fit for the problem space or lack thereof. So I think that's a fundamental thing. What's the nature of the data? I also think folks don't necessarily always spend enough time thinking about who their users are. You might just say, maybe like going back to our academic roots, okay, we have undergrads as part of our population. Well, a first year student experience is different than a fourth year. I mean, there's a lot of variability within that. And depending on the use case, you may care about that difference, or maybe you don't. So it's a marriage of understanding the users, understanding the use case. And then I like to do this, as I've talked to you about, this anticipatory design exercise where we're looking at all of these factors together, like really grounded in a true to life, scenario, and then think about what could go wrong and who could be harmed, particularly given the characteristics of this application. And then perhaps lean in there to, is that population adequately represented in our data to get the outcomes we would expect to see. So that's one way I think UX can be a good partner. And I have an example that sometimes I go back to because it's a very straightforward one about where data can be mismatched for purpose. I don't know if you recall, McDonald's had done this pilot. It was a Gen AI informed drive-through experience. So did you hear about this?
I think I did. Yeah. Fresh me, but I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah. So it didn't work, at least in that first go when they deployed it in the wild. And one of the big reasons that was the case was that the data set, I think it was too clean, first of all, and there wasn't enough noise in the data. I mean, these real world environments, it didn't account for a lot of that variability, but also didn't account very well for folks with accents. So it couldn't understand certain orders. And that's an example of what I would say is a harmful bias, because there are people who were essentially unable to participate in that ecosystem. And one might know that should one actually, take their car through the drive and talk to like a wide variety of people who represent the customer base at McDonald's. So I think some of these things I think we have to have humility, that we're not going to catch everything. And there's things that we need to do to account for that. But there are some things we can just use good judgment and past precedent to help anticipate.
Tangentially, but related, I had an experience. So when I was at UVA Health, we were trying to build some prediction models to try to forecast patients that were at risk for certain outcomes, things of that nature. And we were using a big health record system that was kind of the company that manufactured that system. They provided some off-the-shelf models that you could use for making these same sorts of predictions, right? They were trying to get you to, instead of having to develop them yourself, here, we've got models, we have all this data because we're in health systems all over the country. And so we have like this really diverse and representative set of patients, right? And what we found, and I think this is kind of flipping the bias thing on its head, those models were way worse in our patient population than the models that we built ourselves with only our patient data. Because our patients were not the national average patients. They were different in a specific way that was pretty unique to the hospital that we were working in and the characteristics of the community that hospital is located in, right? And so that's a case where you could sit like there. That is a different type of bias, right? You could almost claim that our data was more biased than this more representative sample, but having that bias associated with the data where this was actually going to be deployed was really important. It was much more effective to use the data that represented our patient population. So that national sample was maybe representative of the country, but it wasn't representative of our population of patients.
I love that. Like a helpful bias in that case.
Right. So,
so interesting. Yeah.
To be biased towards our patients.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to read a note from Bryce. Bryce, thanks for joining. He says, "Hey, Russ, I completely agree with you on your insights about biased data. I wanted to get your opinion on how to effectively synthesize with AI. I feel that it's helped extremely, but sometimes it can be too biased or even incorrect."
Yeah, great question. I'm going to interpret a little bit about that we were talking about how to synthesize the data that we have with a generative AI system that is going to utilize that data in producing insights. I mean, this is a key question that we really need to solve and solve correctly in order to incorporate these tools. I think there are different ways to do this. I think they all involve in some way constraining either what goes into that AI, if you're using an AI agent, or just the LLM model that you're going to be interfacing with, or validating and constraining the output that you get from it. Depending on how much data and context you need, I've had pretty decent success with building RAG systems so that you're creating this data store of the context that you want to be available to your Gen AI model, and you're making sure that you're doing some pre-processing and constraining with that context ahead of even interfacing with that AI model, so that you really have kind of the bones of the prompt and the information that you want to provide to that LLM model. And really, and I have been trying to follow this guideline for most of what I've done in the last year with LLMs. I really just want to use that LLM for its language capabilities and not for its insights. Right? Talk to me in a year, I might shift on that perspective a little bit, but at this point, I think it's a great tool for making the question asking part and the interpretation of the response of data analysis much more accessible. But I don't really want it to do the analysis itself yet. I want to constrain that as much as I can. And so hopefully that answers your question a bit, that I really want to build a pipeline in that process so that I am extracting and validating the pieces of information that are going to go to my LLM to generate whatever response that I'm asking it to generate. And I'm kind of guardrailing that the whole way through, so that I'm not leaving that kind of open to interpretation and open to hallucination and all this other stuff. And there's some pretty good tools that are starting to emerge for actually templating and validating the information that you're getting back from these tools sometimes as well, that I'm encouraged by. So I think that has been my main strategy. It just goes beyond using the browser interface to these tools, right? You've got to do it in a more programmatic way. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Bryce. All right. Well, we are going to go on to another question, another prompt. I just got that. We're prompting ourselves, just like a language model. What is a data pipeline? Now, this might be getting a little bit in the weeds, but I think one of the reasons it's useful to talk in a little bit more detail is that I have found the literature also finds that often where we get into silos, be it UX or data science or other discipline-based silos, is because there's just maybe a little lack of understanding about what one does in one's works, and makes it a little harder to engage. And I thought maybe we could spend a little time breaking down your world a little bit to explore what's going on and anticipate ways we could perhaps partner.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we talk about the data pipeline, I will try to keep me out of the weeds here. I'll
okay.
Try to do my best. But so this is for me where I differentiate opening up a browser or my phone, right, and sending a prompt and getting a response back from a ChatGPT or a Claude or a Gemini or whatever model that you want to use, right? I can use all those models, but the way I want to use them, if I'm building a tool for some new technology or something that's going to interface with data in a more automated way to generate insights for my business or my clients, I am going to use those tools, but in this more technical. I'm trying to avoid using the word pipeline, but I'm going to just say in this pipeline where I grab that input, and then a whole lot's going to happen behind the scenes where I validate the context of the input that I got from the user. I take that text and maybe I try to classify it as a certain type of question. Maybe I inject the question itself into some other more templated version of a prompt that I have. Or maybe I'm just asking people to click and select options about what they want to know. And then I take those choices and I put them in some sort of templated prompt that then gets passed kind of in an automated way to the ChatGPTs or Claudes or Geminis of the world and waits for a response. And I can even in some of those systems say, here's how I want you to format the response that you're going to give me back. I want you to give me 3 different sections to this answer, and I want you to label those sections as such. And I want it in this really kind of templatized data format that I can then use in my system. And once you give that back to me, then I can break that apart and send it to different parts of my interface, and so that you get this hopefully really valuable user experience from the technical information that I asked for. And it is guardrailed in a way that I know that I am not gonna mislead you. I'm not gonna allow that system to actually give away any of my company's business secrets or whatever. I'm not gonna open that up for somebody to come in and just say, tell me everything about who this company does business with and how much money they made from all these different people, right? I can put all these guardrails in place so that in this data pipeline, I'm picking very specific parts of the initial question or prompt, and I have one kind of task flow that I want that to go through, and I have a very specific way that I want to present that information back to my users, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're talking about creating. And when I talked about a RAG or retrieval augmented generation system before, that's where I can plug some different things into this pipeline. Like I have a system that I'm beta testing right now for my own company where I put all this information about my company into this data store. And so if somebody wants to come along and ask questions about my company and I want them to be able to do that and use a generative AI system to answer those questions, I'm still going to make it find data from this data storage system that I've created so that it can only answer based on the information that I've provided. And it's explicitly instructed not to provide answers or make anything up that goes outside of those bounds, right? And so that I can really control the interaction that system has with my clients or customers, even though it's a very kind of comfortable and it's an interaction system that they're used to having because it's the same as you would with any other generative AI system.
It's interesting. Is it fair to say those boundaries and guardrails that you talked about a number of times, that feels to me like a nice opportunity area for UX consultation as well, because as we are drawing lines around what is appropriate, inappropriate, I'm assuming that is informed by the overall user experience or user's perception of what they find valuable, et cetera.
Absolutely. And that's where, I would put that back to you. I think like I need a UX person to help me figure out what those boundaries and guardrails would be. So how would you walk through that with a client that wanted to do a project in this kind of generative AI world? Like how would you get that information so that we could partner and construct the right boundaries for the system?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've done some of that, and I think it is an interesting question, specifically because the outputs can be so open-ended. It's almost like taking that to user and being like, how open-ended do you want? It's very abstract as to like what the possibilities could be. So sometimes I think it's helpful to also be a little abstract in the goals that one has, and making sure that you're tracking to that, or more broadly, even asking about what concerns might you have if I were to tell you that this was an AI system. And sometimes people have opinions about that can at least help us, with disclosures that we might want to share, like how we inject transparency into the system. But I think having a sense of the overall like utility they're going for might also help inform how broad or narrowly we scope things. So sometimes it's a direct question, sometimes you get in an indirect way. And then, of course, like showing some prototypes. We've done work there just to get feedback, like, is this useful, kind of thing.
I'm curious as to whether you've done this in the past, but with some sort of generative AI system where you're essentially opening up this interface so that users can interrogate your data or your company or whatever you're allowing them to do. I think we call this red teaming sometimes, but do you go in with a set of users and intentionally try to see what you can do to make it go wrong?
So typically I've had teams of data scientists and AI engineers who would do the red teaming piece, but where UX fit in, and I'm not saying this is the only way it can be done, it's just my mental model. We would help them derive the codes of conduct based on the research that we've done, so that they know what to test against. Sometimes the red teaming can be, I'm going to say, a little onerous or emotionally charged in some cases. You have to have a certain mindset to do that work, to break the rules, and depending on the context, that can be hard work. I don't know that I'd put that to a user, but that has been one way where we have worked together to do that.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah, no, this is fun.
Would you trust an AI agent to red team?
An AI agent to do what now?
To do the red teaming. To just set an agent to say, ask as many questions as you can think of that would be inappropriate and that would potentially lead to harm in this system.
Yeah, I think we have done that in the past, but again, the data scientists took this on. But yes, we've done those kind of handcrafted attacks, and then some generated ones, simply because a lot of this, sometimes risks don't occur until over time, like, after multiple attempts and all of that. So I think you need some amount of automation in place to do that. So one thing, though, that our conversation also made me think of when we define data, we didn't talk about metadata. But you did talk about coding responses, categorizing them for certain purposes. That I would just offer could be another collaboration area, where how we characterize the data itself has implications for how the system will then use it, and therefore the user experience. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
Cool. All right. Let's see what we have next. Okay. Our next prompt is, how do UXers and data scientists work together to make AI trustworthy? So we've actually talked around this quite a bit, but I wonder if we can put a fine point on, how does this actually all come together in a meaningful way, so that we are making AI systems that are, and I like the word trustworthy because it implies it's worthy of trust, because we've done the due diligence, throughout to make it so. But I wonder if you have a take on that.
I have several takes, I think.
Of course.
And it's interesting because, like, throughout my career, I've spanned so many kind of different iterations of how this actually works in practice. I go back to 20 years ago, and I'm sitting in a huddle room just with whiteboards all over the place with UX personnel and data science. I was more of a project manager at that time, where we were actually just kind of whiteboarding and writing up use cases and testing them in a day and doing this like really iterative, agile. Like, how are we going to take the requirements that one person in this chair states and move it over to this person in the other chair, and implement it and get feedback. And we had that kind of working model where everybody's just in a room explicitly talking to each other and converging on solutions, and slowly this system would grow over time from that. And then I've been in other organizations where this is those two teams live on very different fences, and it's just you get a set of requirements from one, and you just test to make sure that you're meeting them. As long as you do, then those teams aren't really talking to each other, but you're assuming that all the goals are met. And now I think we're in this world where we have to have a hybrid approach with how those teams are working together, where they are actually, they're interfacing with each other on a pretty regular basis to understand and get regular feedback on what is possible from this data set that we've got. Like, what questions can we ask? What features can we enable? And then, from a data scientist perspective, we really need a much better and more concise understanding of what do you expect people to do with this, so that we can make sure that we can answer those questions, we can supply that value, and that we can give you the heads up if something is not actually going to work. We don't, ultimately, we don't want surprises. And so kind of really being on the same page, and I want to say in the same room, but I feel like everybody's working virtually so much that you at least have to be in the same virtual room with people to make sure that you're all kind of understanding the end goal and the product that you're working toward. Is that the experience that you've had in the projects?
Oh, yeah, I think so. And I think being on the same page and understanding and just having an appreciation for the mindset and the process that everyone is engaging with in executing their role. There's something about that I find really valuable. And I remember I even interviewed a data scientist, because early in my collaborations with them, I was like, oh, I don't want to sound like an idiot. I don't know if this question makes sense. And so I had them just like, can you just show me like what you do? Like, pull up a spreadsheet, whatever it is that you're working in. I want to see how you're engaging with the data. And, I came to learn like, oh, you're doing data exploration kind of in the same way I would do it. Probably I would be using a smaller data set, but you're looking at the shape of the data and where are the outliers, and just, getting a handle on it the same way. And it made that very relatable, and how that translates to a final product, I think is also important, because one of the signals of a trustworthy system is that it's transparent to an appropriate extent. And if we can help users to understand, what data we are collecting, what data we are using, and make that data on the other side meaningful, then I think we are developing something that's worthy of trust. And it feels that way to the user, because it can be trustworthy as heck. And if people can't grok that, then it doesn't really matter. Right. And I know you've had experiences that you shared that I thought were wonderful in the healthcare space, where you've got clinicians and you have all this data, and you're arming them or equipping them, with this kind of at their fingertips. But if in their context, in that point in time, they can't easily take advantage of that, it's not going to be helpful, no matter how good the data is, So that's kind of how I think it all comes together.
Yeah, I think, and that goes back to what you said about transparency, and that was such an essential component of those systems we were building. Because if we're sending off this alert through the paging system and telling doctors to go to the bedside and attend to this patient because they are at risk of clinical deterioration, they need to know what they're looking at, like what to look for when they get there. So you can't build a black box model in that environment. It doesn't matter if it is always right. The clinician needs to know what to do, right? So that's this one example. But I think it rings really true that whenever you cannot just make a prediction or create an artifact with your data set, but also create clarity into how that was produced, it goes such a long way to creating trust around the process, and the ability to rely on that system to do what you expect it to do, and feel confident that it's going to do it the next time. And that, I think, enables this. That's what adds value, right? That's whenever you're helping your users or your customers get what they expected out of the system, is when they not only get the results they wanted, but they understand why they're getting it and have confidence that they're going to get it again. That's the key.
Trust is built over time. I think that's a really good point. And another thing, we didn't talk about this, so I don't know your opinions of it, but it does seem, because we've been contending that generative AI has been this paradigm shift that has really necessitated the closer coupling of UX and data science. I think we both believe that. The other thing that I think generative AI has done is made data way more valuable in general, simply because it is predicated on scale. So more data is better. And what that, I think, could potentially create are these moral hazards where, entities are scooping up data by any means possible, and that could be a threat to user privacy, and that kind of thing. So I do believe, we talked about disclosures, but the security aspects of data, I think, also go into this in data governance, which honestly wasn't on my radar as strongly as it is nowadays in the Gen AI world. So,
yeah, I agree on that 100% with all that. And to be honest, I think we've been living in that world for a while, where like the real value, data has become so valuable that people are scooping it up. But I think generative AI just, created a deeper bend in what was already an exponential curve, right? It's so critically important to make sure there's good governance and good controls and good auditability in place to make sure that that your data, that our data is treated with the respect it deserves. Yeah. The systems that are using that data are using it responsibly and are not mismanaging it, because so many things can go wrong if it is.
Yeah, I know. As a former librarian and a researcher, data privacy is always top of mind. But when we think about agentic systems, which I know you've been doing some thinking about, access, data sharing, it's gonna open up a whole new world, I think, in the data privacy respect, which is a whole other. We could do another hour maybe just on agents.
I think the one comment I would make on it right now is that I think we need to be planning right now and governing systems with the expectation that agentic systems are coming soon. Mm-hmm. And so we can't wait until those systems are in place to put the right governance.
Yeah. Yep. Hearing the same from our governance friends. All right, one last question, and then I know we have some comments which I'll read through, and I'll welcome questions as well, but let me get it on screen here. What do you wish people knew about your discipline, Russ? If you could tell them one thing, hey, this is what we're up against, us data scientists.
So one thing, and I feel like I'm probably going to get outdated in this soon, so I better use it. I wish data science sounded less magical. I remember coming from the world of being like a statistics. I was a psychology professor who was teaching statistics. So I felt like I knew a lot about statistics, and then I started looking at the world of data science, and I started hearing these terms like machine learning and artificial intelligence, and I'm like, this must be on a very different level than what I'm accustomed to. And I found out those were just different names for all the things that I had already been doing in statistics for a long time. And so, I think what I wish people understood is that this is all, at the end of the day, it's just math. It is all math. And it's very, even though we can make the system behave in non-deterministic ways, at the root of it is all deterministic math that is going into it. And if we understand math and we don't give it more credit than it is, like, there's not intelligence. It is not. It doesn't have expectations. It doesn't know things, right? It is just producing, which I think is amazing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Science, just by understanding language in a probabilistic way, can do all the things that we can see it do. But that is all it is, right? Let's not lose sight of that, and don't give it more credit than it is. What about you?
Well, quick follow-up. I've had my kids watch videos about how like transformer models work and like large language models on the back, because I want them to know they don't care about you. They don't know about you. They just are doing math. But I think that's a powerful and thing to know. I think maybe about my discipline being a user researcher is that, I think there's this assumption that it's kind of a research just takes all this time and it's going to throw us off of our objective and it's, going to derail us. And I wish people would welcome a bit more healthy friction in the system that one gets from widening one's awareness of the space we're playing in, because technology is a culture changing, society changing powerful influence, and we have accountabilities to human beings who are a part of that. And I think making the space to understand their problems, what could go wrong, what could go right, like how are we serving and making life better for people, that's worth dedicating resources to doing. And it's not necessarily slowing you down. We talked about how it really feeds this life cycle in a healthy way, but I think sometimes the perception is that it's a hindrance.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it is an essential value.
Well, thank you. That's what I want people to know. All right. Well, I think that kind of brings us to a close. I am going to look through the comments. I'll read those quickly. We can hang out for another minute or two. Sorry to go over, folks, but I do want to acknowledge Kian, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Apologies if not. But he says, I totally agree with that perspective. I think LLMs are game changers as general purpose presentation layer, but leveraging stats for the core analytics is so much more reliable. So we talked about like the appropriate use of LLMs. Bryce said something earlier, something immediately standing out to me, notably, was your repetitive stance on constraining AI, maybe constraining AI, while learning how to incorporate these into your workflow. This is something that I now know moving forward to consider while working with raw data. So that's great. And then Bryce said, I would love to know what both Jill and Russ's day-to-day looks like. I bet you don't. I bet you don't, Bryce. We're solopreneurs, I guess, is fair to say. I don't know, I can't presume to speak for your day, but I feel like mine is very much trying to keep up with what's going on in AI, trying to share back out what I'm learning with others as much as I can. I have a lovely client, the Center for Ethics at the American College of Financial Services. We are doing some really great work in promoting ethics, and I'm partnering with Care360.global, if you care to look them up, but they are doing some really interesting work in the space of preparing students and leaders to use AI in a very mindful way. So fortunate to be able to do that. So it's just, it's kind of a hodgepodge, but good stuff. And now I'm partnering with Russ as well. So there you go.
Yeah. My day-to-day, I don't know that I have a typical day-to-day. I mean, like within the endpoints, starting endpoints of those days where, that all involve like getting kids out the door and then like getting them back in a very manageable way and making sure I have two young kids. So it's like making sure they're guided in the right way and fitting my work in between those and around those. But yeah, it's different every day. I try to make time almost every day to do some learning, and just to, like Jill said, keep up with the just incredibly quickly changing pace of AI tools and systems, so I can speak about them as intelligently as possible. I need to carve a meaningful amount of time out of my regular schedule to do that. Yeah. I have one nonprofit client right now where I've got a whole system built for them to do disaster recovery, data collection and automation in the Caribbean. And so I work on any kind of updates we need for that system, building new AI demonstration tools for my own workflow and that I can share with other potential clients as well. I think one new thing that I had to learn about a lot, kind of going off on my own, is like doing all the sales and marketing things that go along with the business. Like you can have great technical skills and products, but you got to have clients to work with to actually deploy those. And so figuring out how to make all that work, I've got to put a meaningful amount of time into that as well. And so it's trying to figure out the right pattern and the right priority for all of that stuff. It's like, so every day is a little bit different than that. And I love spending some time, most days, just talking to somebody new that that knows something that I don't know, and that just helps me kind of understand and broaden my perspective on what we need to be building right
now. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you for staying after, even for those of you who hung out. I'm going to go through the comments and attendee list. I will send folks, we said there was a gift. So we do have a little takeaway to kind of summarize the key points we discussed here, with a few tips to help you really bridge data science and UX, because as we have stated and described. We think it's a really essential partnership. And on that note, if you would like help with your project and combining the strengths of these two disciplines, please reach out to myself and or Russ. Our email addresses are on the screen. We will, connect with one another. If you reach out to us individually, no problem. But we're just excited to, be able to bring this to you and to hopefully make tech better. So, and thank you, Kian. Thank you, Bryce. Thanks, everyone. Wes, I saw you in there too. So I hope everyone has a great holiday and rest of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody who joined. Thank you, Jill, for coordinating all this. It's been a great conversation.
My pleasure. See you all.